right, so good afternoon and welcome to Tamaquag Museum's Lunch and Learn Revolution Asserting Sovereignty series. As our nation continues commemorating the 150th anniversary of the American Revolution, we invite participants to broaden the story by centering Indigenous histories, leadership, and resilience. Here in the Southern Dawnland, Indigenous nations have cared for these homelands and exercised sovereignty since time immemorial, long before the founding of the United States. Through this Lunch and Learn series, we come together to listen to Indigenous voices, deepen our understanding of history, and not simply as a historical concept, but as rooted in land, culture, community, strength of Indigenous nations. Before we begin, just a quick reminder to please keep yourself on mute. You're welcome to share your questions or comments in the chat, and we'll do our best to address them at the end of today's presentation. So our free educational series is made possible through the generous support of the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts, the Pepito Opportunity Connection, the United Way, Rhode Island Foundation, and community donors like all of you. We are deeply grateful for your continued support, which allows us to share this educational programming freely with audiences near and far. Our presenter today comes to us from the Aquinnah people, whose homelands have long been on the island of Nopi, known today as Martha's Vineyard, and the surrounding region of what is now Massachusetts. It is my pleasure to introduce Linda Coombs, who will be presenting Sovereignty, Resistance, Resilience, Survivance, Maintaining in Today's World. Linda 5 years as a museum educator and spent 11 years in Boston Children's Museums, 30 years in the Wampanoag Indigenous Program at Plymouth Plantation, and 9 years at the Aquinnah Cultural Center, a house museum built by an Aquinnah Wampanoag man and showing that history. She has been an interpreter, an artisan, a researcher, led workshops and teacher institutes, written children's stories, and articles on various aspects of Wampanoag history and culture, and developed and worked on all of a wide variety of exhibits. The goal of her work is communication of accurate and appropriate about the history, cultures, and people and other Indigenous nations. So it's my pleasure thank Linda and introduce her to all of you for joining us. And Linda, I'll now turn the program over to you.
Thank you so much, Crystal, and thank everyone for joining us today. I hope that the transmission will come through okay, because you were breaking up a little bit when you were just, introducing me there. So let me know if that happens. But as far as the term sovereignty, it's something that in all of my years of learning and researching and talking to people, listening, I haven't done like a lot of deep research. I'm not a scholar about it or a political expert or anything like that or a legal expert. But I always have wondered what the term actually means. Because as federally recognized tribes, such as the Aquinnah, the Mashpee Wampanoag, the Narragansett tribe, were federally recognized tribes and were referred to as domestic sovereigns. That term has always struck me as an oxymoron, because doesn't sovereignty have to do with being free or unfettered and, concepts like that? I understand that domestic means within the borders of the U.S., but doesn't that mean that we're part of the U.S.? And as such, how does sovereignty apply? So I decided to look up the definition of sovereignty, and this is what I found online. The term sovereignty has always perplexed me as applied to tribes because if we're within the borders of the United States and under the United States government, how are we actually sovereign? So I looked it up just online. Very interesting. I'm going to read it. Sovereignty, general definition, refers to the supreme independent authority and power of a governing body to rule itself, its people, and its territory without outside interference. And there are key types of sovereignty. There's internal sovereignty, the supreme authority of a government to the government has to maintain order, make laws, and exert controlling influence over its own culture and territory. External sovereignty is the absolute independence and freedom of a state from outside control, allowing it to act independently in international affairs. Then there's a couple of other definitions: de jure and de facto sovereignty. De jure is the legal right to rule over a country. De facto is whether the legal authority actually exists and is actively enforced. So even right there, the tribal sovereignty thing seems to be sliding. And they actually have a definition. It says usage in other contexts, predominantly a political and legal term, sovereignty is frequently applied in other distinct ways. Tribal sovereignty refers to the inherent right of Indigenous and Native nations to govern their own people, lands, and cultures, as well as manage their internal affairs. The word inherent jumped out at me, so I looked that up. And the definition there is having a natural, built-in, and permanent meaning that belongs to the very essence of the person, object, or concept in consideration, or being inseparable, a fundamental characteristic. All of that made me think of the times that I've taken language classes, Wampanoag language classes from our linguist, Jessie Baird, and she has used the term inalienable, which means to be not able to be separated from. And so I looked up inalienable, and it says something that cannot be taken away, denied, or transferred to another, most common in legal or political context to describe fundamental human or natural rights belonging to an individual and cannot be surrendered or revoked by a government. Inherent rights provided by nature or a constitution that a person or entity cannot be legally stripped of. So I found all that very interesting. Because while we now have those terms as federally recognized tribes, we still are not actually sovereign, just by those little definitions I found on Google. Never mind a deeper dive. And as I said, in Jessie's explanation, she says something inalienable is something we cannot be separated from, something that is part of us, that we are one and the same thing. For example, the land. In the Wampanoag language, the word for land is Ahkee, Ahkee. We have a thing called noun possession, and certain nouns cannot be used without being owned by someone, being in someone's possession. So I have to say my land, your land, our land, that sort of thing. So if I were to say my land, I have to use the prefix of N or NU, and then you put a T in there so that that U isn't right up against the A. It just makes it flow out of your mouth easier. So the word is Nataki. That's what it becomes. However, that word is still not complete. It needs a suffix that is provided by the letter M. So we have the word Natakim. And when you see that M on the end of a word like that, what that means is me and my land are the same thing. We are one thing. We are not different. We are not separate. That's what that means. Our relationship to the earth is reflected in our language and our language as it has been in use for some 17,000 years now. I am the land and the land is me. That's in the case of using the na prefix. We also have a word nutomas, which means I am from. So if I'm introducing myself, I would say nutomas aquanahanat. I am from Aquina. But it doesn't just mean like I'm from 2 Main Street in Aquina. It means that my DNA comes from that place. I am made from the earth of that place. Okay, that's what it means. And if we look at the word for our leader, sachem or sankyam, you see there's that M on the end of the word, my leader, who is me. We are one because we come from that which is the same as us, the earth. We are all one thing. The same is true for the word for enemy. It ends in the letter M. I can never remember the whole word, but think about that your enemy, that is the same as you, because ultimately we are all related and we are all one. Embodied in those 2 words are foundational concepts that our ancestors built our traditional cultures around. I believe our ancestors were truly sovereign, defined by the way they lived, our traditional cultures, which were created and developed with great thought and intention and love. They were completely able to support their lives and communities while maintaining balance and relationship with the earth. Prior to the forces of colonization, our cultures had developed to a peak point. Before European contact and settlement, we lived in a balanced manner with the earth. At the time of creation, all beings, which were created at different times, humans being the younger of all the other beings, including the trees, the animals who are our elders, every being was given original instructions, which has taught us how to live on this earth and live in such a way that all life would thrive and flourish and so continue. So water does what it is instructed to do, as do bears, mosquitoes, trees, clay, earth, rabbits, turtles, etc., ants, snakes. The original instructions for humans was to keep everything as it was created, meaning all of the ways, the systems that Creator put in place to keep life living, thriving, flourishing, continuing. Humans are to keep those processes intact. We must take lives to maintain our continuance. We have to eat, be clothed, be housed, be warm, be healthy. When we have all those things and don't have to worry about their source, then we can live in a good way, with a good mind, which is following our original instructions. Original instructions are based on the necessity of maintaining natural law. That is all the systems of nature that Creator put in place, the ecosystems, the biomes, whatever other such similar terms are applicable today. That is natural law. The connections, the interconnectedness, the relationships that support life. I have come to realize that our ancestors developed our traditional cultures around natural law, developing a set of values that they lived by. They had done this for thousands of years and generations. There are many values as our cultures were complex and structured. They were developed with intention and the understanding of our responsibilities to the earth and to life. And we had ceremony to help us focus on our responsibilities, to keep our thinking on track, so that we held to that which we have been instructed. Ceremony was a part of all actions or behaviors, thoughts, whether as small as in a simple offering of tobacco to greet the day, or in a midwinter ceremony held by the communities over many days. 2 of the main values are respect and humility. We incorporated them into our everyday lives, into our thinking, and into our hearts. They were reflected in everything we did. These values were woven into the fabric of our cultures and had been practiced for many thousands of years. Practice makes perfect and all that. We indeed lived in a good way with a good mind, that which acknowledges our responsibilities to natural law, to ensure that life will continue and thrive and flourish. So when we hunted for deer, we did ceremony and made offerings of gratitude and thanksgiving in recognition of the lives that were to be taken, taken so that we may eat and have sustenance and so continue. When the deer was killed, we acknowledged that life. Out of respect for its being given, we honor it by using everything. We ate the meat, we made clothing from the skins, we made tools from the bones, we made glue from the hair. Parts not usable were buried with respect and ceremony. We also hunted primarily in the fall and winter when the deer were not bearing their young to honor their cycle of life. The other part of our responsibility, if we take the lives of deer, is to maintain the places that they need for their lives. We keep the forests intact, as the forests are their homes, where they get their food, have their young, bed down at night, follow the same trails to get where they are going. We did the same for all beings that were hunted, all beings that were fished, all beings that were foraged for or gathered, and for those that were cultivated. If you think through the list of beings and assess it like the deer, accounting for and being accountable for the maintenance of the systems, the places where life connects, that is sacred work. So what about when we hunt raccoon, bear, rabbit, squirrel, or beaver, or wolf, fox, mink, or marten, or ducks, geese, and swans, or when we forage for the many types of berry gifts, or spring onions, or milkweed greens, or cattail reeds and bulrush, or cedar poles, or oak and maple saplings when we build our traditional homes. This is a list that is very much longer. It speaks of all the things that we ask of Mother Earth in the continuance of our lives. Creator asks us to be accountable for all of these things, these activities. But Creator didn't raise a bunch of foolish people either. We were also gifted the knowledge, the skills, and the understandings to know what we needed, whether food, clothing, housing, warmth, medicine, and so on, what animals, birds, fish could be eaten or used for hides and furs, what trees and plants could be used in home building or making other materials such as cordage or other uses, what plants could be eaten and which not, which had medicinal qualities or could be used in weaving or similar activities, which woods to cook with or to start a fire or keep it going all night. We knew where to get what we needed. The knowledge of the land, the landscape to know where all the animals, fish, birds lived, ate, raised their young, communicated with each other, plants and trees, what types of area or soil and water they grew in, waters both fresh and salt, when they are still or have current, different types of land such as forests, meadows, swamps, marshes, beaches, etc. We knew how to get what we needed. The ancestors had the knowledge to make all of the tools they needed for hunting, fishing, farming, foraging, house building, boat building, net making, weir making, making clothing and hide tanning, carving wood into utensils, shaping stone into myriad kinds of tools. Fire was a main tool in woodworking, from making spoons or bowls to boats. Fire is used to cook, and people had knowledge of building a fire, what woods work best for certain types of cooking or for smoking foods, or hides as a last step in the tanning process. The knowledge of using fire for warmth and not destruction. Fire is a central being in all ceremonies. Also, knowledge of the life cycles and needs of the various animals or plants so that their numbers are considered and they are harvested in a way that ensures their continuance. We knew when to get what we needed, what season to hunt or fish or forage for certain foods, or to gather certain plants for mats and weaving, or to gather our medicine plants. To live like this calls for the respect for all the rest of creation. This calls for the humility to maintain that respect. Ceremony helps us keep those thoughts present in our minds and hearts, the understanding that we, humans, are not the focal point of all life, but are one strand in the web of life. I have come to believe that our ancestors were truly sovereign because of the way that they lived. They had the knowledge and ability to fulfill all of their needs. They lived long and healthy lives with little in the way of illness, yet with remedies for those they did have. People lived in clans and communities, in close family and kinship ties. They made a point to build and maintain good relations within families and communities, within and between villages, and with other nations of people. This was part of living in balance with the earth. All of this was reflected in our language, as we discussed earlier, and as such, determined how we treated ourselves, other people, and the earth and all the beings of the earth. If things are out of balance in the home, then that can extend into the community and even farther out. Every aspect of living life was considered and accounted for in the maintenance of balance. Living in balance means keeping the earth as it was created and structuring the fulfillment of our needs around that reality. While the Creator gave us the teachings to use these other beings for our continuance, it is our responsibility to maintain the balance of creation by recognizing that they all, plants, trees, animals, waters, rocks, everything, have the right to live or be in their own life as they were created to be, recognizing that this is their sovereignty. I believe that is what sovereignty truly is. The ancestors had maintained this way of life for thousands of years and generations. However, after those thousands of years, we experienced great changes with the coming of European contact and settlement. Our sovereignty as human beings, cultures, governments, communities was not acknowledged or recognized, but actually treated as non-existent, was crushed, ignored, and pushed aside. Over the years, I've heard different people say that the changes that happened were unintentional or inadvertent, even happenstance, just something that happened, or that we succumbed to a superior, more advanced way of life. I would differ with that line of thinking. The age of exploration had really kicked off in 1492 with Columbus and his quest to sail around the world. You still hear, receive information, or are taught in schools that that was his primary goal. What is still not related is his treatment of the indigenous people in the Caribbean, into whose homelands he was intruding. Columbus, over the course of his 4 voyages, was ultimately responsible for the deaths of millions and millions of people. Why? What prompted that? A few decades earlier, in 1452, the Pope, Nicholas, had issued a series of papal bulls or bulletins which stated that Christians can go into the lands of non-Christians, take their lands, the resources of the lands, enslave or even kill the people there. People who were not Christian were considered non-human or less than human, and this was used to justify the right to the land and the resources. The whole point of Christians venturing forth with such goals was to explore lands that the crown they were sailing for could claim in the building of empire. It was all about wealth, gain, money, and profit. So the building of colonies, the processes of colonization, were not inadvertent or happenstance by any means. Europeans had every intention of coming here and taking the land and the resources of the land. The first explorer to this area was Giovanni da Verrazzano, who sailed up Narragansett Bay in 1524. This is only 32 years after Columbus. For 100 years, many ships went back and forth, exploring, trading, fishing, and taking slaves. This building of empire business needed somebody to do the physical work. The group of English people known as the Pilgrims were the first to settle. While the Pilgrim story is still largely told in the mythological format it had always been, I think it is thereby understated and not credited for the import that it had. That settlement caused the world to change and become a different place. Many European countries were vying for territory on this continent, like it was theirs to slice up and disperse, when America got established as a country 150 years after that first settlement. That sealed the deal on the world being a different place than it had been prior. The worlds of indigenous people were completely interrupted, disrupted, and irrevocably changed as well. Colonization is sometimes still understood as a benign occurrence. In actuality, it is a series of processes designed to dominate, control, or even annihilate for the purposes of obtaining land and extracting resources. To this end, we were deemed savages, primitive, backward, incapable of properly using the land or managing our own affairs. Our relationship with the land of living in balance was not even seen or perceived in a real or true fashion. Rather, it was misconstrued as indigenous people doing nothing with the land and not having the sense to build better houses, wear more clothes, feed ourselves, not paint our faces, not worship the devil, to name a few. This judgment allowed Europeans to introduce disease to, quote, clear the land for a better people, unquote. Disease is a powerful weapon of colonization, as was slavery, a well-established industry by 1620, and an industry that funded the settling of America. They introduced Christianity as they believed we were godless, still not seeing that we lived in a way that maintained what the Creator or God had created, so life would thrive and flourish and continue. Colonization brought great changes to the land itself. Forests were cut for European farms, livestock, and ship masts that impacted our ability to hunt and forage. They built houses on the places of our cornfields, limiting where we could grow our corn and other crops. Cattle and pigs were allowed to roam freely, wandering into and damaging our cornfields or rooting up clam beds on the shore. English laws were created that controlled how we moved and lived on our own lands once they came into control of them. We could no longer practice the traditional burning of cornfields and the underbrush, which kept the lands clear and open. Our way of taking care of the land so that it took better care of us. Land was taken from us via deeds with the English, by getting into debt and having to pay with a piece of land. I've just been reading about Quincy, Massachusetts, and how it came to be claimed by the colonial government. Boston was established in 1630, and at some point subsequent to that, they had too many people for what was then Boston, and they needed an enlargement. And that became Quincy and the surrounding areas south of Boston, or what is now Boston. That land was held by Indian title still, which a certain Englishman who was trying to obtain that land had to, quote, and did extinguish that title. Doesn't say how or what he did to extinguish it, just that he did it. This is a book that was written in 1891. It became his land because he wanted it to. So he apparently had the right to just extinguish the title of the original owners of the land. Let's see. It became his land because he wanted it to, and just sort of blew off any Indian title rights or any respect for them. The taking of land is a process that has not ceased. Over the course of history, we have been made invisible, experiencing many forms of erasure, from what is written into the history books or not written, to whether we are perceived as real Indians, more justification to taking the land, or today having the land, or preventing us from getting any land back, since we're perceived as not existing anymore or not being real. We've also experienced a lot of spiritual and psychological warfare to make us ashamed of who we are, who we were born as, that of Indigenous people. We were physically reduced in numbers, sometimes health-wise due to changes in diet, lack of access to food or ability to get food, and to the relentless onslaught of such psychological warfare. For example, in a paper that Jesse Baird gave at Plymouth Plantation, almost 30 years ago now, she talks about this psychological warfare and how, in the course of teaching Native people, Wampanoag people in this case, how to learn English, they were done so with phrasing that was demeaning and, eventually communicated to them that they were stupid. Okay. There's a book called Indian Converts. It was written by Experience Mayhew. He was the grandson of Thomas Mayhew, who was the first settler missionary on Martha's Vineyard in 1640. And Experience wrote this book reporting on all the people on Martha's Vineyard, Wampanoag people who had converted to Christianity. He breaks the book into chapters about men who converted and became pastors, men who just converted, women who converted, and then children. And in the children, there was a 16-year-old by the name of Eleazar Ohama. And Ohama couldn't move without having the Bible under his arm. He drove people crazy because he's always preaching Jesus at them. He'd go out into the woods and like flagellate himself and, all that stuff that's in the Bible. And he died when he was 16 years old. Doesn't say why he died, but I think a big part of it was his state of mind, because on his deathbed, he was asking to be forgiven for the state in which he was born, which was as a non-Christian or as a Wampanoag. So for a person that young to get to that point in his mind, the application of Christianity, that application is actually the antithesis of what it is supposed to be, In Indian Converts, there's another passage where there's an older man who is just berating all those people who had not converted. They're causing the magistrates trouble and these people the trouble and the community the trouble and the other people all this trouble because they won't convert and become good Christians. The Bible was converted into the Wampanoag language in 1650-ish. And a lot of Wampanoag people, in this case, owned that Bible and would write a lot of things in the margin. One man wrote, Neen Musanan, Neen Musanan, Neen Musanan. I am a person. I am a person. I am a person. His teaching of being taught Christianity was making him feel like he wasn't even a person. So he had to write it just to reinforce it to himself. And several years ago, I was in a language class with Jessie, and she was talking about that word "neen," which is I or me. And she says people didn't usually use it in just regular speech, regular everyday conversation, because they were humble. They had humility, and they didn't even put that much emphasis on them, like I did this or I did, they just didn't do it. But they would use it if they wanted to really strongly emphasize something. So to me, that man is really having to reinforce in his own mind that he's a person. And there was an older woman's going back into the 80s, I think, Mrs. Chummock. She was a Herring Pond Wampanoag from the Bourne area. She lived in New Bedford. And one day some of her grandchildren came up and said, well, Grandma, can you tell us about being Wampanoag? What does it mean to be Indian? She went on in this whole thing about hunting and fishing and living that way, growing when she grew up and going out in the woods and foraging for food and different medicines and plants and the whole thing. big, long speech about this. And she finished up by saying, but, I don't really know anything about being Indian, but, So this is a kind of place that some people got to. Not all of us, but some people did. That is wrong. That is evil to bring people to such a place. I had the experience working at Plymouth Plantation that I was told that I was not a person, I'm an Indian. There it is, right there in that person's thinking. That we are not human. You know, but we survived all of this. I could go on for like 2 weeks with all of this colonization stuff, but I don't have that much time today. There's a lot. We survived and we're still here. And to me, that in itself is a statement of sovereignty. And we survived because we have our communities and our kinship. We still live where we always have. Mashpee and Aquinnah, in the case of Wampanoag, Herring Pond, are three of the original Wampanoag communities that existed, since time. Many, many people still hunt, fish, farm, forage, relate to our Mother Earth in those ways. We still have our dances and songs and ceremony. Maybe we don't do it like our ancestors, but we gather the pieces that we still have and we weave them back together. We may seemingly have been quiet all these years and centuries, but the spirit of our ancestors is strong in our hearts and minds, in our blood and soul. They are always with us, and they kindle our spirit. Because we are who we are. We are them, and they are us, and we keep doing what we have always done. So we hunt and fish and gather medicines. We garden. I once learned about a Wampanoag woman, Delilah Sampson Gibbs, who lived in Wellfleet, Mass, down on the other end of the Cape. And she was born approximately 1760. We know that she died in 1839. She was friends with a white family down there. I think there was a woman about her own age. That woman developed breast cancer. This is circa 1800, 1820. The landscape was intact enough, and Delilah had the knowledge to go out into the forest, gather the plants, and made poultices, which she put on this woman's chest. And one day she took the poultice off, the whole tumor came with it. And that woman lived for many, many more years into old age. To me, that's the power of the ancestors and the power of our faith in the Creator. So we pray and we have ceremony. We know our homelands and our sacred places. We know where our ancestors are buried. Our spirit rises up out of our seeming quiet to let the world know we are the indigenous people of this land. If we look on the other side of the Neen Mussanan coin, we have certain qualities and characteristics that have been come down to us. Some people are very steadfast and unhurried. Makes me think of my dad. He was a plumber by trade, and he was a guy that just moved at his own pace. No matter what you did, you couldn't hurry him up, couldn't make him go any faster. My mother used to get angry at him and go, "Your father has two speeds, slow and stop," which I think is hilarious. My uncle Milt, his brother, he was a welder on Martha's Vineyard in Edgartown. And especially in the summer, he'd have, all manner of people coming in wanting their work done right away. And he just went, whoever came in the door first, that's the one he did, no matter how big, how small. And he just didn't react to their pressure, yelling at him or what have you. He just kept going. Over at the Aquinnah Cultural Center, we have some 40 interviews that were done with elders in the 70s and 80s. And there was one woman, she died in 2012 at the age of 100. And she's talking about when she was a kid eating cornmeal Indian dumplings and how they went down just like sinkers. And I was like, wait a minute, what does that mean? Because I've had cornmeal dumplings. If you make them out of like Quaker cornmeal, they don't go down like sinkers. They're going to dissolve into water, because it's all degerminated corn. So I'm like, oh my goodness. When she was a kid, we must have still been growing our own corn, which, as it happens, was the case. That is a miracle to me, just an absolute miracle. People lived by hunting and fishing and gardening and foraging into the 60s and 70s. Um, we've learned other things as a result of colonization. I had a friend who, it was like if you made a time to go to the movies on Saturday, this is Wednesday, and come Saturday morning, you'd be like, I ain't going to the movies. Yeah, but you said, I don't care, I'm not going. Yeah, but you promised, I don't care, I'm not going. But we made plans, I'm not going. Just bang, clear. And it took me a long time to sort of realize what that was. Because another time there were, in the 70s, there were gas lines at the pumps, the gas shortage and all that. And we were talking about that one day, and he says, well, I don't care if gas goes up to $5, I'm going to drive. Mine was clear as a bell what he was going to do. I think one of the most comical situations was another friend who had gotten a vacuum through Rent-A-Center, where you pay rent weekly to, for this vacuum. She gotten behind in the payments. The guy calls her and says, well, ma'am, you've gotten behind in your payments. She's like, yeah. And well, if you can't, get caught up with that, we'll have to come get the vacuum. Well, come get it. Oh no, I'm sure we can work it out. No, come get the vacuum. Oh, I'm sure. No, we can do something. No, come get the vacuum. But ma'am, come get the vacuum. She was not going to let that man manipulate her with that narrative about whatever or a vacuum. Even as she says, she was wrong as 2 left feet because she was behind in her payment. You know, um, and after seeing many people, this is in Mashpee, be like this, and it's like, okay, we've been colonized every which way, including Sunday, and here's the line: I'm not going any further. This is it, and that just trickled down into everybody, into personal life, everyday life, And to me, well, it can be kind of hard to deal with if it's aimed at you in the moment, but it's something that I've come to respect very much, to have that strength and that inner strength, that stamina to stand there and hold your ground like that. I also see in our people a great desire to learn our languages, our histories, our cultural practices, our ancient skills and technologies. These are our birthrights, our inalienable and inherent rights as human beings to be who Creator created us as. We are the people of this land and whose ancestors walked with us always in the woods and along the waters. If we maintain our humility and our respect for all creation, if we once again find the balance that structured our ancestors' life, we will rebuild, reclaim our sovereignty. It is not something to be given to us from the outside. We need to get in touch with the feelings, insights, instincts, understandings, find ways to peel back the layers of colonization and bring back out that which we still carry within us. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, Miss Coombs, thank you so much. I've like watched your YouTube videos and I read your book of Colonization in the Wampanoag Story.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love the way that you broke it up into like the different perspectives. I love that. And one of the things that resonated with me from that book that I carried with me, and you spoke on it today, is they were gathering something, and you talked about how they left like either tobacco or sage or something, but they would leave something as like a thank you for giving life, for taking a life. And you touched on that today, and it
Yeah.
just further solidifies what you said about that relationship and having respect and being one with the earth. So again, just thank you because I love the work that you do, and it just was full circle today what you said.
Thank you. I think you're referring to one of the other values, which is that of reciprocity. If you take something, you have to give something back. So you
Mhm.
maintain balance. You know.
Thank you, Sherry. There is a question from Katie Woods. She wants to know what was the name of the 1890 book, the 1891 book talking about
Oh,
the Indian title rights in Greater Boston.
it was a book on the history of Quincy. It has a big long title, and I don't have it right in front of me here.
Okay.
I could send it to you if you want. I found it. There's an antique bookstore, over in Katuitt, next door here,
Mm-hmm.
and I got it there, or I found it there. But it was
If
just
you
a history
send,
of like Braintree and Quincy, Massachusetts, from the
if you want to
17th
send it
century.
to me in my email, anyone who wants that, feel free to email
Yeah.
Chris C. Baker at tamaquagmuseum.org. Is there anyone else who wants to ask a question? Thank you for all of your comments. Here it is. I'm tuning in from New Bedford, Linda had shared an anecdote about a grandmother, Shumack
Chummock. Yep.
Chummick. I laugh because that must be my Herring Pond best friend's grandmother, so affirming. And yet we talk about this ingrained, quiet shame often.
Yep.
Can you speak on young people fighting that feeling when trying to claim their heritage?
I think it's something, again, I mean, like with anyone, it varies from person to person because, some young people are like right out there. They're in the circle, they're dancing, they're doing language, they're doing whatever. Um, um, at my tribe in Aquina, we have some young ladies that are jumping in and dealing with the town of Aquina and some of the issues that are going on between the town and the tribe. And then I see other people. I ran into a man who's my cousin the other day, and he's a man in his 60s now, and he just works for a home, improvement store, not a chain, but a kind of a independent one, and he has his kids and grandkids, and just out there living his life. But he never gets over to the island. He never does anything with the tribe, and it's just, and you can almost see it in him that he almost the will to even want to is like just been so pushed down, like it's not important. He's been made to feel that it's not important, but that sort of translates as to, well, then I'm not important either. So
Hmm.
you live this kind of subdued life. I mean, and I see a lot of both of that, you know.
Hmm. You touched on the pilgrims. Can you talk a little about the stores of corn and other food that indigenous people had stored away, which the pilgrims used to sustain themselves?
Yeah, before they ended up in Plymouth, they were at the other end of Cape Cod in what is now Provincetown Truro area. And and they had spotted some, native people out there at a distance, but those folks just like ran away into the woods. They did have what's now known as the first encounter, where they pulled up on the shores and a bunch of, Womps came running out of the woods shooting arrows at them, and the Pilgrims shot back at them with their muskets. And I don't think anyone got hurt, and everyone just sort of beat it back, home or whatever. But that's become known as the first encounter. But the Pilgrims were exploring the area for a place to settle. Um, and and Cape Cod was forested. That even way down there, I guess the dunes that are at Provincetown didn't exist, and people planted, and there were certain areas where people planted, certain areas where they lived in the forest in the winter, away from the water, and there's still room down there to do that. And the Pilgrims found a storage pit of corn because people grew bushels and bushels and bushels of corn to, like not just eat in the summer, but to, they dried it and kept it for over the winter, and also food for over the winter, but also seed for the next spring. And the Pilgrims took all of that. So they didn't, when they returned to their summer planting site, they didn't have either food or seed corn. So, and it took the Pilgrims a couple of years to pay it back.
So I think we can have time for this last question. How did the first meal occur? You touched on that a little bit. How did the first meal?
You mean like the first Thanksgiving?
I think that might be what she means.
Yeah.
That wonderful story.
Yeah, everything that's generally out there about the first Thanksgiving is the mythological version. And they're in the sources. I think it's in William Bradford in his book of Plymouth Plantation, and in another little book called Mort's Relation. There's just a passage in Morse relation. I mean, in the 17th century, people didn't standardize spelling or punctuation or paragraphing or any of that. So there's this big long page, and he's talking about, yeah, we worked on the house and did this, and then we went to the ball game, and then we came home and did the laundry and blah blah. And then the governor sent 4 men on fowling, and they got some deer and some turkey. And then Massasoit came amongst us with 90 men, and they stayed 3 days and played games. And then the next day we all went out to the mall and did other things. So here's this little thing, and it literally, that's about all it says. And Massasoit came amongst them with 90 men. They stayed 3 days. There were Wampanoag men that went out and got 5 deer to contribute to the feast. And that's really about the only factual pieces that are in there. And it doesn't say that they were invited. It doesn't say everyone had turkey and cranberry sauce and sitting at the table, because there was at least 90 Wampanoags. There was 52 English at the time. 140 people aren't all going to sit around the same table. So there's that. And so, it's really been concocted to be this mythological thing of friendship, because it doesn't say why Massasoit showed up either. Doesn't seem like, there was too much trouble going on if they stayed for 3 days and were playing the games and whatnot. But, I've learned to just not elaborate. People want to make it nicey nice, and the Pilgrims and Indians were friends, and we want to get to that point so badly. But then you're making up history if it's better to say, well, this is what we know, but here's all this other stuff that we just don't know. So,
right.
Yeah.
So. Right. Thank you. Well, thank you. And thank you, Linda. It really was very powerful. Your sharing today was very powerful. And thank you, everyone who did join us today. And this presentation, as mentioned earlier, will be available on our YouTube page later this month. So feel free to rewatch it, and of course, tell others about this presentation as well. So we encourage you to join us next month. We will be continuing our Lunch and Learn series, and we're going to carry this conversation forward. I believe in the month of August, we have a presenter coming to us who is Laguna Pueblo. So you can find that online. Check out our webpage. Remember to visit the webpage for other upcoming events as well. We hope that you have a wonderful afternoon and Pish Kanash, which means we will see you again. Thank you, everyone.